Yeah, an interesting thing was in one of the chapters. You talked to Chris Flowers and Rebecca Lehman, his partner. They're partners in. They're now in the Peace Corps, I think, in Moldova. But
Yep.
they originally were in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so one thing I found really interesting is like, and kind of the core, one of the kind of core struggles, kind of an example of a core struggle, how you live your values in sort of a reddish area, is the fact that there's an ice cream stand that's like a local ice cream stand, but also there's something a little problematic about the ice cream stand. So tell us about it.
So they love the ice cream stand that they go to. It's a locally owned place. It's not a big chain. It has delicious ice cream. They want to support a mom and pop ice cream store. It has a big picture of President George W. Bush right there on the wall. And they came. So on some level, the folks serving them ice cream disagree with them profoundly. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't think, how can anyone honor and savor the memory of President George W. Bush? The other side is, what are they going to do instead? Are they going to go to a local chain? Are they going to go to Dairy Queen? Is that better?
Yeah.
So it becomes tough for them. They also have a funny story that there's a place that they go to that they think has a lot of sort of progressive things about the workplace. That I guess they discourage tipping for the waiters. Instead, they have big signs about how they pay their waiters a living wage. Great, that feels good. But they secretly suspect that the owners are sort of a conservative libertarian brand of ownership, and they just don't want to ask. They don't want to be disillusioned with the folks that they're agreeing with. So they laugh at themselves a little bit as they say that, but they're also very serious about our dollars, our consumer time and energy is an investment that should reflect our values as well. And it's not easy to do on a daily basis.
I'm talking again to Justin Krebs, author of the new book, Blue in a Red State. You can find it at blueinaredstate.com. Well, let's move a little north and a little west from Ohio and talk about, again, another person that I'm personally friends with, our good friend Dan Henry in Idaho Falls. I want to talk about something that you write about in the book, about a really interesting interaction that Dan had with his school board and some of his teachers about evolution. So tell about that.
Well, as I said, you get some liberals who duck and cover and don't want to talk politics, and some who go the other extreme and talk about it all the time. Dan sometimes finds this mischievous middle. I mean, for one, here's this very liberal guy who is absolutely registered as a Republican. Why? Because in Idaho, the only challenges in any primaries are going to be in the Republican primary. So if you want to have a say of who's going to be elected, you might as well vote Republican. So that's already sets him off a little bit. He speaks to his daughter's biology teacher in high school and just asks very neutrally, so what do you think about the theory of evolution? And he doesn't tip his hand one way or the other. And the science teacher is clearly kind of on his toes and says, well, I feel like we should present it. I present it as a theory, presented that we don't talk a lot about it. He's almost apologizing for it. And Dan almost says, wait, I'm a scientist. My whole family is scientists. Don't worry. We believe in evolution. We want you to teach it. Be proud of it. But the teacher was probably so used to hearing from parents who said, how dare you teach my child evolution, that the teacher himself had trouble being proud of what they were able to teach in the classroom. So it is a funny way, though, that you can find these allies. And in a way that the teacher needs to hear from parents like Dan and like many others who say, wait, I want my kid to get the best education in the world. I want my kid to be competitive in the world that he or she is going into. I want them to have a critical analysis for the world. I want them to be learning science. I want them to be learning facts and creativity and imagination. And, there's another case that Dan said of a book that was banned. I'm blanking on the name of it. The Sherman Alexie book was banned from his kid's school. So he read it with his son instead. They read it together. So Dan took it upon himself to make sure that if the school was not going to give his son the opportunity to have his horizons pushed in a certain way, he would do it. And of course, what's interesting about Idaho Falls, you have the city with the second largest density of a Mormon population in the country, which brings a lot of conservative elements to it. And you have an enormous nuclear research facility that attracts some of our brightest scientists from around the country who then live in Idaho Falls and say, wait a second, I've spent my entire career training to be reality-based, and now I'm in a land where religion is dominant, and it really creates an active tension in Idaho Falls. And yet at the same time, Dan is one of those people who says, it's been a great place to raise my kids.
One through line that it's not in every single instance, obviously, because you actually did talk early on about, there are definitely some people in the book who are religious, but there actually was a pretty strong through line of many of the people in the book that you talked to of atheism. So talk a little bit about that and how you think that maybe shapes their liberalism and progressivism.
So I, having grown up in a place where there are plenty of secular and atheist folks, I grew up in New Jersey, I went to school in Boston, I live in Brooklyn, I had this assumption that many liberals around the country would actually be much more religious, and that they had found a way to weave together their religious beliefs and their liberal beliefs. And in many cases, it's true. You in Texas, Kathleen from Grapevine, Texas, Chris from Yankton, South Dakota, they both tell stories about their congregations that they're active in. But again and again, you hear a story of people who grew up in a conservative town or a conservative family, and their coming of age as a liberal also coincided with their coming out of their religion. That losing their religion was also tied with losing their conservatism, which was really interesting, and it's a story I heard again and again. In many places, finding other atheists has actually been a huge source of community and reaffirmation for these folks. Dan, I think, is one of the founders of a secular atheist society in Idaho Falls, and there are a few others in the book like that as well. And of course, I've even heard some people say that they think it would be harder to be an atheist where they live than to be a liberal. A woman in Oklahoma City I spoke to talked about coming out of the closet as a liberal and being able to do that once she found other liberals she could talk to. And then she whispered, but I still can't tell most people I'm an atheist. And that was really surprising to me. But in a lot of people's personal stories, those things go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what sticking on, I guess, talking about Dan, one thing that I found, and again, what I find so inspiring, not that I'm going to follow Dan's advice on this, because again, I had 18 years in Nebraska growing up. I am done with the red areas for myself personally, but I love like Dan's quote. I'm going to just paraphrasing. He was like, and a lot of this is sort of a through line of a lot of these people living in these red areas where it's like Dan thinks it's better to be in a place where his progressivism he feels is actually doing the most good. And honestly, I can't really argue with that logic. I just personally can't. I don't think I could deal with living in a red area after I had my childhood in a red area, so I don't really need to be in a red area for my adulthood here. But but again, it's something I really greatly admire about all of the people who are in these areas fighting for liberal and progressive values, where the people that surround them, a lot of them diametrically oppose what they're actually trying to stand for.
Mm-hmm. You Matt don't need to prove your cred, your liberal cred. You worked those hard years in Nebraska to escape the coast. But it is a story we hear again and again of people wanting to be where they can do the most good, whether that's Dan starting a pride parade and a pride celebration in Idaho Falls that's really helped the LGBT community and its allies come together in a very public way, or it's Kathleen, who grew up in the same town in Texas where she now lives, might not see politically eye to eye with her own family, but is absolutely committed to improving the school her kids go to, improving the practices of the city council, which has for so long been this opaque body that she's trying to open up. A lot of people really do value that opportunity to have real impact and to have real influence, and some people find it harder to do in the blue areas where because everyone quote unquote agrees with you, people don't take it as seriously. Even a place like New York, one of the reasons we started the Drinking Liberally Happy Hours 13 years ago is that we knew that many of the folks we were around agreed with us, but no one felt that they needed to talk politics. Politics was almost a taboo thing to talk. And it was like, oh, I agree. We don't need to go any further than that. We're like, well, yeah, let's go further than that. Let's find where we disagree. Let's learn from each other. Let's engage more. And when you're living in the political minority someplace. And I think this is probably true for conservatives who live in New York and in Boston and San Francisco too. So I look forward to the response piece read in a blue state coming out sometime soon. But it's probably true for them too that even while you feel at times a bunker mentality, you're in the trenches, you also feel like you're doing some good, that you're honing your values and your articulation of values in a really important and powerful way.